Now, there's another story in the Bible about a funeral procession, and that's in Luke 7, and I can pick it up from verse 11. And Luke 7, verse 11 has got the story of the widow. I heard something really interesting the other day, and you're quite welcome to correct me if I'm wrong. The grave for the unknown soldier that's in Westminster Abbey, there was a funeral that was held for the grave, and they had 4 choices, 4 different people, and they chose one of them. And correct me if I'm wrong. Okay, correct me if I'm wrong, but they had 4 choices, and they chose one, and I understand that 100 women were chosen from the British Armed Forces who had lost their husband and all of their sons in the war, and 100 women were chosen to be part of the funeral procession for the unknown soldier. And they had 100 of the most decorated soldiers in the army as part of the funeral procession as well. And it was almost like a nation of grief, a nation of hurt, and a nation that were going to honor the unknown soldier. And so this whole procession was for this loss that had taken place, where these women had lost everything, and the nation was mourning the loss of their prized possessions, their prized possession, which was their sons. Yeah, it was their prized possession. And so this grief that went on and this mourning that went on was a moment of connecting with the loss that had gone on. Now, if you read Luke 7 and you read from verse 11, soon afterwards, this is Jesus, he went to a city called Nain, and his disciples were going along with him, accompanied by a large crowd. Now, as he approached the gate of the city, a dead man was being carried out. So you can see this picture. They're walking up to this city, they're just in their travels, and they come across, coming out of this city, death. Okay, this open casket, because we can tell it's open later. And out in this funeral procession is this kid, okay, is this son. And he said, a dead man was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow. And so you can now picture this woman. She's a believer in God, she's a Jew. And she has lost her husband. I don't know what the circumstances are, it doesn't say. She has lost her. So she has stood with her son and buried her husband and been through this once. And now she is marching out of the city where she lives, going to go home to an empty home. And she is now burying her son as well. And if any of you have lost stuff, you will be able to connect with this woman with loss. And it says here that when the Lord saw her, he felt compassion for her. Well, thank goodness for that. And said to her, do not weep. And he came up and touched the coffin. Now, that was something you didn't do in Jewish culture. The dead body was unclean. You didn't go near it. If you went near it, then there was a defilement that took place, and so you were not supposed to touch the dead. Now, in the last talk I did in the baptismal, we talked about the unclean and Jesus touching the unclean, so I've covered that then. But Jesus reaches in his hand and says, young man, I say to you, arise. So in the midst of the huge disaster, it wasn't even there. They didn't even know who he was. In the midst of all of this, there is a moment where Jesus transforms the situation in a way where no man could possibly have ever in a million years, ever in their wildest dreams, ever have done anything to make that happen. Not only that, but this young man is dead. There's no, he has enough faith for it. He's not lying there believing. Is he? And so let me add this into the mix. Your healing and your life and your salvation and coming back to life is not dependent on you. In this situation, that's illustrated. Sometimes it's dependent on you doing something and getting up and getting on with it. But sometimes there are some things that we are powerless, utterly, wholly, 100%, nothing we can do about the situation. We utterly need God to get in and intervene. And I've just talked about how sometimes he doesn't, but sometimes he does. And this is the key for this whole kind of thing, is that when we talk about healing, there are processes and elements for which we can do all sorts of things, and there are doctors out there that can do amazing stuff. But there comes a point and we reach a limit to what human capacity can do, and there is nothing we can do about it, and we are utterly, totally, 100% dependent on God to intervene because there's nothing we can do anymore. Yeah? And so this is the pace of faith to stand. You see, there's another reaction we can have when God doesn't heal. And it's almost fatalistic. It's kind of like just accepting it and just choosing to live it through it. And often in churches, there's another one, which is I'm going to refuse to accept it. And I'm not going to accept that that's dead. And I'm not going to accept, and I'm going to pray and pray and pray and pray and pray. And sometimes that doesn't change the situation either. It's not dependent on us or the way we react. It's dependent on God to intervene. And as Christians, this is critical, because you can do church. You can have it dependent on the way we do things, on the structures, the processes, the things we set in place, the bulletin boards and the communications always being out on time. Everything can be 100% accurate and in place and everything else. The doctors can always be there at the moment's call. The pastors can always be there at the moment you need them. Everything can be in place, bum, 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 1,000 times over. The perfect church that you all want and all dream of and everything else, which is this, the pastor's just amazing and is Superman and just dives in and saves the day. And here I come. And everything's solved and sorted, and everything can be absolutely pristinely 100% perfect. But we will never raise the dead without the Spirit. And what I mean by that is the train wrecks that are beyond capacity for human beings to deal with it. Yeah? The ruined families. The addict that can do it no longer and is still addicted. The son that runs away and is not going to return. The marriage that splits and divides and is utterly broken, and all there is left is bitterness. There is a point where we are not clever enough, we're not wise enough, we cannot do enough, and there is no way out of it beyond trusting that God will find a way through this. And that's what's going on with Mary and Martha in John 11.